I always knew I wasn't really one of them, but it never stung quite like it did that day, standing there at my grandfather's funeral, the cold November wind slicing through the black suit I had barely managed to afford, watching my family gathered in tight circles, whispering and laughing under their breath as if the old man lying in that coffin were just an afterthought. My mother stood with her arms crossed, not crying, just tight-lipped and smug, my uncles slapping each other's backs like they had just come from a golf tournament instead of a funeral, my cousins, preening and giddy, trading glances like kids about to open Christmas presents they knew were already theirs. The will reading wasn't held at some dusty lawyer's office but right there at the gravesite, under a white tent, because apparently even death was a production in this family, something to be packaged, presented, controlled. The family attorney, Mr. Calloway, looked uncomfortable as he shuffled the papers in his hands, clearing his throat too many times, and when he finally started reading, his voice cracked a little, but nobody cared. They were too busy nudging each other when their names were called. Natalie gets the beach house. Of course she does. Uncle Richard gets the stocks. Aunt Marcy the rare wine collection. Luke, my charming, freeloading cousin, gets the vintage car Grandpa had polished every Sunday. It went on like that for a while, each name followed by gasps and gleeful little cries, until finally Mr. Calloway cleared his throat again and said, "As for Daniel," and paused for just a moment, almost like he was giving me one last chance to walk away before hearing it. I didn't. I stood there, feeling every pair of eyes swing to me, some filled with pity, most with barely concealed amusement. "Daniel," Mr. Calloway continued, not looking at me, "Robert leaves you with his best wishes for your future endeavors. Best wishes. That's it. No watch, no photograph, no letter, not even a pocket knife. Best wishes." And the laughter that followed wasn't even disguised. Sarah let out a soft snort. Luke elbowed her, and they both giggled like we were at a comedy show instead of a graveside. I swallowed hard, willing myself not to react, not to give them the satisfaction, but inside it felt like something vital had just snapped. My own mother didn't even meet my eyes. She just adjusted her sunglasses and pulled her coat tighter around herself like I was a bad smell she hoped to ignore. "Well," Uncle Richard said loudly, "I guess that's that." The others murmured in agreement, already shifting their attention back to the real business at hand, divvying up Grandpa's things like hyenas at a fresh kill. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling like the earth should have opened up and swallowed me, but instead it just stayed cold and indifferent. As the crowd began to thin, Mr. Calloway hesitated, then shuffled awkwardly over to me, holding out a small, battered envelope, yellowed at the edges, my name scrawled across it in the messy, familiar handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a boy. He said nothing, just pressed it into my hand with a quick, almost apologetic glance, then turned and disappeared into the crowd like he hadn't just set something in motion that would change everything. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket without opening it, feeling its weight, heavier than it should have been, like a stone pressing against my ribs, and walked away from the tent, from the whispers and the glances and the smug, satisfied smiles. No one called after me. No one noticed I was gone. As I trudged down the gravel path toward my rusted-out car, I realized I hadn't just lost my grandfather. I lost whatever thin, fraying thread had tied me to these people. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, staring straight ahead through the cracked windshield, the envelope burning a hole against my chest. I could have opened it right there, but something in me said not yet, that whatever was inside deserved more than a quick glance in a cemetery parking lot. So I drove. I drove past the town where I had grown up being told I was never enough, past the school where teachers praised my cousins and sighed at me, past the diner where my mother once forgot to pick me up after Little League. I drove until the landscape turned unfamiliar, until the signal bars on my phone disappeared, until the only sound was the hum of the tires and the low, persistent ache building in my chest. Finally, at a ragged turnout overlooking a frozen river, I parked. The world was quiet here, untouched by the greedy hands that had shaped the day behind me. I took the envelope from my pocket, hands trembling a little now, and stared at it. My name. Just that. No, beloved grandson. No, dear Daniel. Just Daniel, plain and unadorned. I tore it open with a careful finger, unfolded the single sheet inside, and began to read. And that's when everything changed. The letter wasn't long, but every word of it felt heavier than anything Mr. Calloway could have read under that pristine white tint. In my grandfather's messy, unmistakable handwriting, it said, "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means they got what they wanted. Let them have it. They always valued appearances over substance. But you were different. You saw through it. You always did. even when it cost you. You didn't bend, you didn't beg. And for that, I saved something they'll never find, something they don't deserve. Use the key enclosed. You'll know where to go. And remember, family isn't blood. It's loyalty. Taped to the back of the letter was an old brass key, tarnished with age, heavy in my palm. No address. No instructions. Just a memory surfacing in my mind, sharp and sudden. My grandfather's old bookstore. Whitmore's Books, tucked away on a forgotten street on the outskirts of town, long closed after Amazon and Life did their damage. It had been abandoned for years, boarded up, just thick enough to choke on, but I remembered sitting behind the counter as a kid, watching Grandpa fix broken spines on books like he was healing living things. I hadn't thought of that place in over a decade. And now somehow, I knew that's where I had to go. The sun was low by the time I pulled into the crumbling lot, my headlights catching on cracked windows and a faded sign that creaked in the wind. We'd pushed up through the asphalt, reclaiming the land. Most people had forgotten this place even existed, which, I realized, was exactly what Grandpa wanted. The front door was chained, but the side entrance, the one we used to sneak out of when he closed up late, looked untouched. I slipped the key into the old lock and, after a few tense moments of jiggling and coaxing, it clicked open with a reluctant groan. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint, bittersweet smell of paper left too long without readers. The shelves still stood, leaning like tired soldiers, the books themselves gray with neglect. My footsteps echoed as I crossed the floor, disturbing small clouds of dust that swirled in the cold air. I didn't know what I was looking for, not exactly, but as I moved deeper into the store, past the philosophy section, past the travel guides from a world that no longer existed, something pulled me toward the back, to Grandpa's old office. The door was stuck, swollen from years of dampness, but I threw my weight against it, and it gave with a sharp crack. The office was just as I remembered, a battered desk, an ancient typewriter, filing cabinets rusted at the corners. But there, under the worn oriental rug, was a telltale bulge. Heart pounding now, I knelt down and peeled the rug back, revealing a trapdoor. Not hidden exactly, but not obvious either. Just subtle enough that no one looking for first editions or petty cash would ever think to look. I slipped my fingers into the recessed handle, braced myself, and heaved it open. The first thing that hit me was the metallic smell, sharp and clean, like the inside of a bank vault. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Beneath the floor was a reinforced compartment, no bigger than a closet but lined with metal shelves. And on those shelves, meticulously organized, were boxes. Dozens of them. I grabbed the nearest one and lifted the lid. Inside were papers, but not the moldy tax returns or faded certificates I expected. No, these were different. Stock certificates. Bonds. Deeds. I blinked, unable to process what I was seeing. Some of them bore dates going back 50 years. Some were for companies I recognized instantly, tech giants, multinational conglomerates. My grandfather hadn't just been sitting on dusty first editions. He had quietly, brilliantly amassed a fortune. I sat back on my heels, breathless. If these papers were legitimate, and they looked very legitimate, then the old bookstore wasn't a forgotten relic. It was a vault, a dragon's hoard, and it was mine. Grandpa had hidden it right under their noses, trusting that their greed would blind them to anything that wasn't shiny and immediate. They got the houses, the cars, the wine collections. I got the real legacy, the one they would never, ever be able to touch. Still stunned, I explored deeper. Some of the boxes contained other things too, rare coins, vintage jewelry, art appraisals. I found a locked briefcase with a smaller key taped to the bottom of a shelf. Inside were bearer bonds, the kind of financial ghosts you only heard about in old crime movies. Each one worth more than my entire student loan debt, if I still had it. By the time I closed the trapdoor again, my hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the realization that my entire life had just changed. Not because I was rich, though I was, if even half of what I found was real, but because for the first time in my life, someone had seen me. Really seen me. Seen my worth, my loyalty, my stubborn refusal to become what the family wanted. Grandpa had believed in me when no one else had. And now, his faith was about to pay off in ways none of them could even imagine. I locked up the bookstore carefully, making sure nothing looked disturbed from the outside, and drove home in a daze, the brass key still warm from being clutched too tightly in my hand. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning. I would need a financial advisor. A lawyer, not Mr. Calloway, someone new. I would need to move carefully, quietly, while they were all still gorging themselves on beach houses and vintage wine. They thought they had one. They hadn't even realized the real game had just begun. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without fear or anger pressing down on my chest. I dreamed of hidden rooms, of locked doors swinging open, of treasure unearthed not with greed but with patience. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, not from dread but from a fierce, almost childlike excitement. I wasn't just free of them. I was ahead. And best of all, they didn't even know it yet. I didn't go home right away. I drove for hours, the city lights falling away behind me, the cold, open road stretching ahead like a blank page. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free, lighter than I had in years. Like someone had finally cut the marionette strings that had tangled around my throat for most of my life. I stopped at a diner off the highway, the kind of place with cracked leather booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since Nixon was in office, and sat there in the corner with a black coffee cooling between my hands, thinking about how it had all come to this. About how all my life, they taught me that family meant sacrifice, but only one way, me for them. About how they sneered when I succeeded without needing them. About how they laughed when they thought they had finally pushed me out for good. Now, they would spend the rest of their lives choking on their own greed, buried under the weight of the debts they had pretended didn't exist, scrambling for scraps while I, the ghost they thought they had buried, lived a life they couldn't even dream of anymore. Grandpa hadn't just given me wealth. He had given me a mirror to hold up to them. And what they saw now was something they couldn't unsee, the truth. Their empire wasn't built on legacy or loyalty. It was built on using people like me. And now, without a willing victim, it was crumbling like rotten wood. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion collapse. Word spread fast. Marcy had to sell the beach house just to cover the first collection notice. Uncle Richard tried to fight it legally, and ended up hemorrhaging cash on lawyer fees before finally giving up and declaring bankruptcy. Luke moved back in with his parents, all charm gone, bitter and broken. Sarah stopped posting her perfect family brunches online. Natalie, fled to another state, her name blackened after Grandpa's old friends started talking, after investors pulled out of the fake wellness brand she had been trying to launch. They tried to spin it, of course. They told anyone who would listen that I had betrayed them, that I had cheated them, that I had tricked poor old Grandpa in his final days. But it didn't stick. Too many receipts, too much truth, and too few people who still cared about defending a family name that was starting to rot from the inside out. I never answered their calls, never returned their emails. When they showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door, shouting half apologies and half threats, I simply waited them out in silence. Let them rage against a door that would never open again. I wasn't their emergency fund. I wasn't their shameful little secret. I wasn't their scapegoat. Not anymore. Instead, I started building something new. I sold the old bookstore, not to a developer, but to a young couple who dreamed of bringing independent bookstores back to life. I sold it cheap, on the condition they keep Grandpa's name on the door. Whitmore's books would live again, not as a dusty secret, but as a second chance. Grandpa would have liked that. I bought a small house by the coast, one with creaky floors and wide windows that caught the morning sun. No neighbors peeking through the blinds. No whispered judgment when I came and went. Just peace. I started investing, not just money, but time. Time into hobbies I had abandoned, friendships I had let wither, dreams I had shelved for more practical things. I learned to cook properly. I picked up a battered guitar from a secondhand shop and remembered what it felt like to create something with no one watching. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids who had been written off by everyone else how to fix things, cars, bikes, computers, how to look at something broken and believe it could still be saved. I didn't hide my success, but I didn't flaunt it either. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about living a life that didn't require anyone else's permission. Christmas came and went without a single call from my family. New Year's Eve passed in quiet celebration with a few real friends. People who didn't care about my bank balance, only about the person standing in front of them. Spring bloomed along the coast, and for the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something terrible to happen. I wasn't living on the edge of their chaos anymore. I had stepped out of it entirely. One morning, months later, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. I knew the handwriting instantly. My mother's. I stood there for a long time, the sea breeze tangling in my hair, the sunlight warm on my face. Then, Without opening it, I tossed it into the trash. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. Some ghosts deserve to stay buried. I turned away and walked down the path toward the beach, the sand cool under my bare feet, the horizon wide and bright and endless ahead of me. And for the first time, the real first time, I wasn't surviving. I was living, on my terms. At last. I didn't have to wait long for them to make their move. Like moths to a flame, drawn by a light that could no longer see but could still feel burning somewhere just out of reach, they came crawling back. Slick smiles stretched over rotting intentions. It started innocently enough, another family dinner invitation, this time hosted by Aunt Marcy at her sprawling suburban home, the one she had practically carved Grandpa's initials into after she snagged it from the estate. A potluck, they called it. But I knew better. It was a trap. Still, I accepted. Not because I thought they deserved anything, but because it was time. Time to show them that whatever game they thought they were playing, they'd already lost before the first move. I arrived a few minutes late, just enough to make a statement. Marcy opened the door with a brittle smile that cracked at the edges when she saw me standing there. Calm, clean, confident. The living room was full, Uncle Richard in his signature too loud blazer, Luke in his overpriced loafers, Sarah with her surgically frozen grin, and of course, Natalie, perched on the arm of a chair like a vulture waiting for something to die. They all turned when I walked in, their faces flickering through a range of emotions: forced happiness, poorly masked greed, raw resentment. I could smell it on them, thick as perfume. Dinner was a formality. They tried to play it casual, making strange small talk about the weather, real estate, politics, anything but the roaring elephant in the room. I let them squirm, sipping my wine slowly, letting the silence stretch longer each time a conversation faltered. Finally, Uncle Richard cleared his throat and leaned forward, his hands steepled like he thought he was at a board meeting. "Daniel," he said, voice low and oily, "we've been thinking. About the family. About unity." I said nothing, just raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue digging his grave. "You know, your grandfather's passing. It's left a gap." Marcy jumped in, nodding solemnly like she was leading a prayer circle. "We're all trying to adjust. But it's important we stick together. Support each other. Especially financially," Sarah added too quickly, then blushed when Richard shot her a glare. I tilted my head slightly, like I was genuinely curious. "Financially?" Natalie rolled her eyes. "Cut the crap, Daniel. We know Grandpa left you something. It's obvious." There it was. Finally. "And what exactly do you think he left me?" I asked, voice light, almost amused. Luke snorted. "Oh, come on. You disappear for weeks after the funeral and suddenly you're driving a new car, wearing designer suits? You think we're stupid?" "Yes, actually," I thought. But I didn't say it. "Not yet. We're family," Marcy said, clutching her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Family shares. Family helps each other out." I set my glass down carefully, the click of it against the table sounding louder than it should have. "You mean like how you all helped me at the funeral? When you laughed at me? Voted me out before the dirt was even on the casket?" An uncomfortable shuffle rippled around the room. No one met my eyes. "That was a misunderstanding," Richard said finally, his voice stiff. Emotions were high. People say things they don't mean. Natalie scoffed. "God, Daniel, stop being so dramatic. You know how this family works. You're in or you're out. You made yourself an outsider long before Grandpa died." I leaned forward, smiling, but it was the kind of smile you show just before setting a house on fire. "And now you want me back in? Now that you think I have something you want?" Silence. Heavy. Thick enough to drown in. Finally, Marcy, ever the diplomat, tried one more time. "We just think it's fair. If Grandpa left you assets, any assets, they should be divided. It's what he would have wanted." I chuckled low under my breath, and that chuckle did something to the room. I saw it, the way their shoulders tightened, their eyes darted. They knew. Even if they didn't know what I had, they knew enough to be afraid now. "You're wrong," I said, voice soft but cutting through the room like a blade. "Grandpa left me exactly what he wanted me to have. And it's mine. All of it. No splits. No negotiations. No charity." Luke stood up, face flushing. "You selfish little." "Sit down," I said, calm as ice, and to my surprise, he did. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a small stack of papers, and tossed them onto the coffee table. "Since you're so concerned about fairness, here's a summary of the trust Grandpa set up. Entirely separate from the estate you vultures picked clean. Legally airtight. Ironclad. Untouchable. Marcy grabbed for the papers like a starving woman, flipping through them with trembling hands. As her eyes scanned the documents, her face went from pink to pale to a sickly shade of green. You can't, she whispered. I already did, I said. Richard snatched the papers from her, scanning them with growing horror. This isn't right. We could contest this, he barked. I shrugged. You can try, but you'll lose. Every penny you waste on legal fees will only tighten the noose around your own necks. And me. I leaned back, letting the moment stretch out deliciously. I'll be on a beach somewhere, sipping something expensive and laughing. The room erupted. Natalie shouting, Richard swearing, Sarah half crying, Luke pacing like a caged animal. Accusations flying like shrapnel. You're betraying us. You're ruining the family. After everything we did for you. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket, letting them rage. Letting them see that nothing they said, nothing they screamed, could touch me now. You never did anything for me, I said, voice cold and clear. You used me. You mocked me. You wrote me off the second I wasn't useful. Grandpa sighed. I see it. And now you get to live with it. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the knob. Oh, and one more thing, I added, glancing back over my shoulder. You might want to check the terms of Grandpa's trust carefully. There's a clause about calling in outstanding debts. Interest compounded annually. Retroactive to the first unpaid favor. Their faces went blank, then twisted in horror as they understood. Grandpa hadn't just given me wealth. He had given me power to collect on every loan, every gift, every penny they had ever begged, borrowed, or stolen. I smiled, for real this time. Good luck. And I walked out into the cold night, leaving them behind once and for all, their cries muffled by the slam of the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could already hear the empire collapsing behind me. The days that followed felt surreal, like I had stepped out of the funeral and into another life, one stitched together with secrets and second chances. I spent hours each night cross-referencing the documents from the bookstore, researching the companies, calculating the values. Every time I thought I had a handle on it, something new would surface, an obscure holding that had blossomed into a tech giant, a piece of real estate in a booming city center, a collection of rare books alone worth hundreds of thousands. Grandpa hadn't just saved, he had invested with precision and vision. He had built an empire in silence, while the rest of the family drowned themselves in appearances, golf tournaments, and gossip. And now it was mine. Quietly, methodically, I set about securing it all. I hired a financial advisor, not some flashy firm downtown, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Mia who had a reputation for discretion. She didn't blink when I showed her what I had. You're sitting on generational wealth, she said simply, looking over her glasses at me. Handled right, your grandchildren's grandchildren won't have to worry. I nodded, swallowing hard, the reality sinking deeper into my bones. This wasn't just a safety net. This was a kingdom, if I wanted it to be. Meanwhile, the family spiraled. It started with little things, whispered phone calls, nervous text I ignored. Hey, Daniel, look message one afternoon. All fake cheer, we should grab a drink sometime soon. Catch up, you know. No mention of the funeral. No mention of the public humiliation. Just sudden, suspicious friendliness. Then Aunt Marcy started posting vague Facebook statuses about ungrateful family members and people forgetting where they came from. I laughed out loud when I saw it, the sound sharp and bitter in my empty kitchen. It didn't take a genius to guess what was happening. The beach house needed unexpected repairs. The stock portfolio wasn't as bulletproof as Uncle Richard thought. The wine collection didn't fetch nearly as much at auction as Marcy had bragged it would. Their golden prizes were cracking around the edges, and for the first time, they realized there might have been something else. Something they missed. It wasn't long before the real desperation began. My mother called, her number flashing on my screen for the first time in months. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her voice brittle and strained. Danny, honey, we should talk. Family's family, after all. Let's not let misunderstandings fester. Misunderstandings. That was rich. Next came Uncle Richard himself, leaving a message so soaked in fake warmth it made my skin crawl. Dan, buddy, heard you're doing all right. Listen, we've been thinking about some new investment opportunities, family ventures, you know? Should talk. I deleted the message without listening to the end. They didn't know. They couldn't know. Not yet. But they suspected. The final straw was Natalie, of course. Always Natalie. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She texted one night while I sat on my couch, a whiskey in hand, the city lights winking at me through the window like conspirators. You think you're so clever, don't you? We know Grandpa gave you something. It's only fair you share it. We're family. Don't be an ass. I stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring slightly as a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Fair. They wanted to talk about fairness now. After laughing at me at the graveside, after erasing me from their world with a wave of their manicured hands, after throwing me away like I was less than nothing, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. The next morning, I called Mia. Start moving everything, I said. Set up the trusts. The LLCs. Hide it all so deep they'd need a map and a miracle to find it. She didn't ask questions. She just said, already on it. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about making sure that for once, they couldn't take from me. Couldn't twist the narrative. Couldn't sink their claws in and suck me dry. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a clean break, as precise and final as a guillotine blade. Still, a part of me knew it wouldn't end there. People like them didn't just let go. They would come, eventually, with smiles or with knives. Maybe both. And when they did, I would be ready. I wasn't the naive kid standing awkwardly on the edge of family photos anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. And the best part? I hadn't even played my last card yet.